I think we have enough people in here. We got people from Tennessee, from all sorts of places kind of chiming in. Argentina, looking good. Hi there, my name is Eric Welfel. We are here today to talk about breach and attack simulation. It is a part of the Essential and Edge solution here at Resilience. In case you don't know who Resilience is, we are a cyber risk company offering risk quantification software, cybersecurity experts, and A+ insurance integrated solutions for large and middle market organizations. A little bit more about me. My name is, again, Eric Welfel. I've been at Resilience for about 3 years here now. Before that, I was working for the higher education industry for about 10 years in endpoint security and vulnerability management. Today, I'm joined by the Attack IQ team, our partners on this endeavor with breach and attack simulation. We have Stefan Chenette. He is the CTO and co-founder of Attack IQ. And I'll give a brief description of what he provided on his bio. Stefan Chenette is the co-founder and CTO of Attack IQ, where he has spent the last decade helping shape the company's breach and attack simulation platform. Stefan led Attack IQ's product and vision for the first 5 years, and now focuses on ensuring customer success and guiding the company's technology strategy. With over 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, Stefan has worked with organizations of all sizes, from startup to global enterprises, helping them strengthen their security programs. He has shared his insights at top industry conferences such as RSA, Black Hat, AttackCon, and CanSec West. Stefan's work is centered on making cybersecurity more effective and accessible for organizations facing today's complex threat landscape. Thanks for being here today, Stefan. We also have Jose Barajas. He is the VP of Global Sales Engineering. He has over a decade of experience as a security researcher, reverse engineering malware, and developing security controls and analytics. At Attack IQ, he now focuses on improving security controls efficacy through attack behavior emulation and establishing continuous security validation programs. Jose has presented at Black Hat, Global Tech Security Conference, and ISACA Security Conference, and actively leads research partnership efforts with the MITRE Ingenuity. With that, let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda today. So we'll be going over what breach and attack simulations are, how they work, why they're important, what the ideal host is to deploy these tests on, how to pick the right packages, so getting started with packages and which packages to choose, how to review the reports that are produced from running those packages, and with the recommendations and mitigations on those reports, how you can harden your infrastructure with actionable recommendations that you can take action on immediately. And lastly, we'll have some time for answers to answer any lingering questions around breach and attack simulation. During the presentation, please hold your questions, but feel free to type your messages in Zoom chat or the Q&A function. This webinar is being recorded, and everyone who signed up for this event will get an email with a link to download the recording. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Jose and Stefan to talk a little bit about what breach and attack simulation tests are.
Great. Thanks, Eric. I'm excited to be presenting with the Resilience team. We have an international audience, so excited for this presentation. I'm going to start by giving our audience a background on Attack IQ, breach and attack simulation, and our partnership with Resilience. So Attack IQ pioneered the breach and attack simulation space in 2013. Our mission was and has been to enable organizations to proactively assess, validate, and optimize their security controls and build ultimately a more resilient security program. So if you're not familiar with breach and attack simulation, or BAS, it's a capability that enables organizations to continuously test their security posture by running tests that mimic behavior of adversaries, but doing so in a controlled and safe way. So ultimately, BAS allows companies to identify gaps in their defenses, validate the effectiveness of their security controls, improve incident response capabilities, and from those results, prioritize remediation or mitigation efforts. It also assists in determining how much risk you want to assume versus insurance you should take. So what's important to know is that BAS in the last 10 years has moved from being a nice to have to a necessity for organizations to truly prevent, detect, and respond to cyber threats more effectively. And I think you'd be interested to know that 70% of customers find gaps in security controls during testing. And we'll go over more stats and more urgency around BAS and why you should run it. But that alone should get you curious to start testing using BAS. Attack IQ has partnered with Resilience to power the BAS functionality offered within Resilience's Essential and Edge solutions. And as we'll see shortly, the effort to run these tests is low and the value is high. Agentless testing that simply requires you to download a test, execute on a machine that you want to measure the readiness of. And at the end of the day, it's about understanding your risk so that you can balance out the amount of insurance you want to take versus the risk that you're willing to accept. Next slide, please. So when we talk about breach and attack simulation and BAS test, what are these tests? So BAS tests are a systematic way for organizations to continuously assess and validate that their security controls are working by simulating real-world cyber attacks. The goal is to identify weaknesses in defenses before adversaries can exploit them. So Resilience's platform and BAS capabilities, which is powered by Attack IQ, offers a range of BAS tests, leveraging a comprehensive library of tactics, techniques, and procedures, otherwise known as TTPs. And these are based off extensive research and threat intelligence. These TTPs simulate a wide range of attack vectors, helping organizations to identify areas of risk. So let's talk about the main two types of BAS tests available within the platform. First, you have baseline test, and then you have adversary emulation test. Baseline tests are the foundation of BAS testing and focus on ensuring the basic functionalities of security controls like endpoint detection and response, EDR, antivirus, content filters are working effectively. And so the aim of baseline testing is to verify that the security controls, in this case EDR, are active and operational. Are they even on? Second, it's to ensure that these tools provide the expected basic detection and protection mechanisms. So running baseline tests first is essential because they validate that the core security mechanisms are functioning correctly. If these basic controls are not working, or running more advanced tests might reveal gaps that really could have been prevented earlier. Next, we have adversary emulation test. So once baseline tests confirm the basic security controls are in place, the next step is to run these types of tests. They're more advanced, adversary emulations. These tests simulate the behavior and the patterns of threat actors and malware relevant to your organization or industry. So adversary emulation uses real-world attack patterns from known threat groups or malware, and we break them up into stages and steps. These tests examine how well your defenses can detect and respond to more advanced attacks, including endpoint and network-based capabilities. The recommendation, as you'll see and we'll talk about further, is really to run baseline tests first and then proceed to adversary emulation. This ensures that any fundamental issue identified in baseline tests are addressed before moving to more complex scenario. So now let me pass it to Jose, who can dive a bit deeper on why BAS is a necessity in your security and risk program and walk through how testing works.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, for describing that. And, I just like to reiterate it. I like to use an analogy of sports. When I did basketball in high school, the coach would make us do fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. So to Stefan's point, let's make sure that all this investment you've made on your technology is actually working by testing the fundamentals of the security control baseline. And you really should test it because, as we found in our experience here, security controls fail silently. What we found doing a study across all our customers is essentially, on average, EDR only stops, the top 7 adversary techniques 39% of the time. Now, that is not reflective of the technology that you've purchased, you bought, and that you're running, but it is representative of the typical configuration that we observe from customers using these technologies. I have a story I'll share later on massive misconfigurations that we've observed in the field. But overall, these EDRs, I've personally experienced it. Some have 50 knobs, others have 200 knobs. How do you know when changing one of those things is going to affect your security controls? That's the difficulty that you're dealing with, and this is why we want to test and not have these controls fail silently. To Stefan's point, 70% of customers, saw something in their environment that wasn't working. If you guys have been in IT long enough, you guys know the 5 nines. And I think one thing that we've been talking a lot about here at Attack IQ is, while IT has historically have to make sure that those services are running, the investment made in IT is actually functional and working. Because if it doesn't happen, the business isn't going to function. Well, with security, if something fails, we don't know about it. It sits there with that problem, and not until a compromise happens or something else occurs do we actually notice. So that's another reason for that. And then finally, we've continuously done research with Verizon as part of their DBIR report. And what they've stated is over 80% of the time, 82% of the time, the breaches could have been prevented. The technology that they needed to mitigate the threat in front of them was there. It just was misconfigured. It kind of goes hand in hand with that first statement that we made about the EDR, but Verizon seeing it at a much broader level across the entire industry, given the scope that they have. So these are the reasons why you want to test. Now, with that said, testing is challenging, right? Historically, testing is done by a person or a red teamer, these kind of exercises. So that means, the budget's not there to necessarily do that. Also, it takes time, right? Having someone come into your environment, defining the scopes and those sort of things, very difficult and time consuming for the organization itself. As you'll see, I see a lot of questions coming in, by the way. Please keep those coming. We'll definitely answer them at the end. But, we've built our attacks, just to slightly answer one question, in a way where the scope is very defined. What we're doing is we want to understand your environment, again, your basic controls, your ability to mitigate specific ransomware that we've seen out in the field. And again, no need to hire a third-party person and create this entire process that would be difficult otherwise. The other thing that is challenging is, what do you test, right? We see headlines all the time. I'm sure your executives or your directors are asking you, what are you doing against this threat, right? So from that perspective, we didn't just say start with baseline, then do, testing of threats. We did that because that's what we've observed. If your basic AV isn't functional and working, why are we even bothering with a ransomware test? So from that perspective, we provided a guided path for you to make sure that your effectiveness is there, and then verify that effectiveness against the latest threats. And then finally, these threats can be extremely complex. We have threats that have 10 steps. We have threats that have 45 steps, right? And within that, there's a lot of logic that attackers take and decisions that they make. All that research is done by the Attack IQ research team, codified into a single Flex package, so that you can focus on the results and the outcomes and not have to worry about, how do I emulate Fin7 or Turla? That's our job, and you can focus on making sure that your environment is getting better by doing this testing. Now, how do these tests work? We keep talking about these breach and attack simulation tests. The way that it works is, one, you're going to select a test package from the Resilience platform. After you download the package, you're going to select the host where you want to run this on. Typically, you want to select the host as representative of your environment. Maybe you have different zones within your organization, maybe selecting different zones, but you're going to execute this package on that local machine. What this package is going to do is, we've recreated the MITRE TTPs. We're not running malware or anything like that, but we are replicating the exact actions that the attacker did. So we're going to generate that activity on the host, modify registry, try to generate ransomware behaviors, maybe try to do some web communication to see how your environment will respond. As part of our process, we don't just run the attack, we'll also do cleanup. If we dropped a file in your system, we're going to clean it up after ourselves. Our entire customer base here at Attack IQ runs things in production, so it's safe for you to do the same too. And by the way, we find that a lot of times production has some settings that staging or UAT simply does not. So that's a big reason why we highly recommend that you test in production. Finally, after doing that, running that execution, you're going to get an encrypted JSON output file. You're going to upload that back into your Resilience platform. We'll do an analysis that will then give you an output of your results, which is actually what we're going to talk about next, is the reporting and the type of output that we provide. So I'll hand it back to Eric with that.
Righty. So selection and implementation. We've dove a little bit into this, but where do we want to run these tests? These tests, generally, you want to run on a hardened configuration, a standard for your deployment for your standard employee laptop, or that web server you're going to be exposing to the internet. You'll want to start with those hosts, kind of like a microcosm of all your security controls. So this would be a host that your standard employee is using, that has your EDR, that has your antivirus, that's behind the corporate firewall, that has your group policy objects that have been placed, or your MDM hardening that you guys have applied. And anything, Stefan or Jose, you want to add for, identifying a target host for these?
I can chime in here. So, when you look at, as Jose was saying before, when you look at your different devices that are crucial to continue your business, they're most likely broken up to the zones, whether from a business entity perspective or regulatory perspective. And you really want to choose to start with, one location that represents that zone, that has the security controls that, are representative of that particular area. So whether it's the endpoint controls, the network controls, the policy that you assume has a certain capability. And then it's at that point, you can start running these particular BAS tests and testing your assumptions. And so now you've tested one machine or one entity within the zone. You can start expanding within that same zone, or now choose another sample area in another area of the network that represents perhaps different policies, different configurations. And in doing so, you're really building out the foundation that you're not only just putting in place security controls and policies and configurations, but getting into the practice of regularly testing.
Yeah, and picking those different zones is important because you can make sure you consistently rolled out your controls throughout your environment, or set up those unique controls for, say, your DMZ or different locations, and you're able to uniquely harden each of those locations based on their business function or whatever critical business functions they need to perform.
Yeah, and something else.
All right. Oh yeah.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna.
Oh no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna add one more thing too. Luckily COVID is behind us, but I recall when COVID happened, a lot of our customers were like, I need to think about my, at-home users and their VPN connections back to back to the organization. So also just thinking about those kind of situations. Where do your people work? How they're doing their daily work. In this case, my recommendation here is, if you have people at home testing on VPN, let's make sure that those connections are working. Some of the things that we found is the VPN was not, capturing all the traffic, or, everyone had the same IP log in the background, which doesn't help you if you need an investigation. So thinking about those kind of situations specific to your business and how your users operate is also something to consider when thinking about where to run these tests as well.
Thanks, Jose. All right, so Stefan briefly went over the different types of tests, but choosing which tests to run in our resilience platform. We do recommend you start with those baseline tests. They focus on a single control at a time. It is a baseline, so we recommend that you follow through with the baseline tests, follow through with the recommendations and mitigations on how you can harden that endpoint, and then test again. Once you've got decent scores on these baseline tests, then you should move on to the adversary emulation. But focusing on these guys here, they evaluate a single control at a time. So you have these three main areas that these baseline tests focus in: endpoint detection and response, antivirus, and your next generation firewall, and content filtering and similar items related to that next generation firewall. The EDR test is behavior based. All these tests are organized in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. The EDR test happens to focus on credential collection. So it's going to be running a bunch of tests related to obfuscated Mimikatz credential collection tools. And it's more behavior based. So it's also looking at your PowerShell execution policy, and if that's secure enough, and if it's allowing random executions to go on, or whether a threat actor would be able to elevate their privileges on a standard user count and execute whatever they wanted. You also have the antivirus baseline test, which is just various samples of malware, viruses, and ransomware samples that are defanged. And basically, it's going to save those items to your file system to see whether your antivirus will statically be able to detect those. You also have the content filter test. These guys is based on those same kind of file hashes, so ransomware, viruses, and malware, and it's actually going to be transporting that to your endpoint through any intermediate firewalls, through your border firewall to that endpoint. But it's not saving it to the file system where your antivirus or EDR would grab it. It's saving it to memory. So our only goal here is to focus on those intermediate firewalls, those content filter abilities, to see if those items get stopped as they travel through. And do you guys want to cover anything else on those baseline tests before we move on?
No, I'll add a little bit to it, which is majority of these particular baseline tests are again broken down into further categories. So within a content filter, whatever your vendor solution is here, there's certain categories that you might have turned on in terms of features within your content filter. So within these BAS tests, categorically are also broken down into certain more specific scenarios. And the huge benefit here of each of these more specific technology controls is this is very collaborative testing. So whether you have a very small team or a very large team, obviously smaller teams, easier to communicate. Larger teams, this is now an opportunity as you're identifying gaps, issues, misconfigurations within any of these. It's an opportunity to now to collaborate with perhaps the IT configuration team. A security team might find a gap, and this is an opportunity to reach out to the IT team that's responsible for, say, the content filter and collaborate. That is a huge opportunity that many teams don't get to practice until it's too late, until there's an actual real incident and everyone's hustling around and has not actually gone through the exercise of if we found a gap, how would we remediate or mitigate in these circumstances before it's a real scenario.
Yeah, great point, Stefan. I think collaboration among teams is super important here, right? But I think another thing to consider is the relationship with your vendors. Don't be afraid to reach out to the vendors and ask for help, right? You might run into these things and find something that, is going to leave you baffled. You might ask, why is it that this was not mitigated? I would say reach out to your vendors and ask them for help, and they should help you correct it, right? Don't judge them on the initial kind of result, but judge them on how they help you get better and improve. So that's something that we see a lot is folks will struggle with fixing things and they're struggling internally. You have vendors that, frankly, you're paying a renewal every single year. So feel free to lean on them. They want to help you. They want to make you better because they want you secure. If something happens to you, it means you're not going to renew their contract next year too. So please, you have that resource, take advantage of it as well. So.
And just another note on these packages, it is a nice thing to do to let your IT team, your security team, your MSSP know when you might be testing these packages, at least initially, so they do not think that it's some form of incident that's occurring in front of them. So we do recommend you give notice. Not everyone should be running these packages. A IT or security engineer should be probably utilizing these out of the platform, just to be clear on that space. Stefan and Jose, could you briefly chat about the unique technologies that are involved in the next generation firewall test and some of the other packages related to the PCAP replay functionality that you guys kind of came up with and you guys utilize in these packages?
Yeah, happy to do so. So one of the things that we've done here when it comes to the network behavior is we've done two things. One, we have content that can actually generate a live web request. Think about trying to make a call to something as simple as facebook.com to see whether it gets blocked. The other thing that we have is PCAP replay. What we can do there is we can take a full replay of whether it's, command and control communication to an attacker server or something as simple as a web request. If I go with that example, and we're taking PCAP content where we're just sending the content back and forth between the Flex package and our service. And what that does is it makes the firewall analyze it based on the content going through the server. So when it comes to something as simple like a web request, we know that the firewall is actually analyzing based on the content, not on the host name or the IP and static blocks based on that, but that it's actually analyzing the content. And then it also means that we can replay full CNC network traffic, meaning something with an attacker in another country and the type of data being transferred. We can do that in a safe manner within the scope of our PCAP replay service so that we can see how your environment would respond. So that's a technology that it's our PCAP replay functionality that you'll observe in some of the tests that you run here.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, I just thought that was really cool tech that you guys came up with for these packages. So thanks for talking about that. Next, we have the adversary emulation packages. So once you've hardened your environment to the baseline tests, we do recommend that you move on to the adversary emulation tests. These will test your EDR, your antivirus, and next generation firewall and adjacent controls all at once. These are full attack chains that have happened in history. You're going to get a full description of kind of the attack as it historically happened, the threat actor groups involved, the TTPs involved, the MITRE attack framework as all the tests are broken down in. And the great thing that you can say when you, after completing one of these tests, is that you are resilient against, you know, the Lockbit 3.0 ransomware. So if a threat actor group were to attack you with the existing TTPs from that attack chain or something similar, there's a good chance that you guys would not have an incident, or that you guys would your controls would be at a good enough place after using breach and attack simulation packages to assure that nothing happens worse to your environment. They have packages from all different threat actors, the Kimsuki groups, the North Korean threat actors. They've got groups from Russia. Do you guys want to go a little bit more into the adversary packages, how they were designed, some of the threat actors they might be running into in those, that kind of thing?
I can at least cover at a high level, and perhaps Jose, you might go into a little bit more detail, but at a high level, you know, within Attack IQ, we have our attack research team, or ART team, constantly researching directly, as well as collaborating with a number of global threat research teams. And what we look at is both specifically what are the different campaigns from some of these threat actors. What are more specifically the patterns? At the end of the day, you know, many of these threat actors repeat the same types of patterns. They're using the same tools. This behavior can be identified. And so what we're looking at here is capturing the various campaigns from specific threat actors. And these behaviors, because we look at them as patterns, this is what we're capturing in the adversary emulations. And so the goal here is that if you look at some of these adversary emulations and have exercised these as tests within your environment, and these are actors that are relevant to your industry, and you've exercised them before an actual incident, then you'll be much more better prepared to understand, to Jose's point, what knobs you need to turn on, what thresholds really you need to be more aggressive rather than less aggressive, because you've tuned your environment to be prepared for these types of adversaries. Jose, I don't know if you have anything more to add from a specificity perspective on some of these threat actors that we've included.
Yeah, I saw quite a few questions about, you know, our threat intel sources. I think the only thing I'd want to add is, you know, one, Attack IQ, we're researchers with MITRE Ingenuity. So, you know, I saw mention of things like micro emulation plans and those things. So that's a threat intel source for us too. But specifically, for those of you that know CISA, you know, CISA, a government organization, releases, you know, these reports on threats all the time. Attack IQ is constantly monitoring those. So those are our U.S. government telling us the most active, you know, behaviors and threats. So that's another source that we're using here for selecting the threats. And I think, you know, absolutely, I think pick them based on your industry, based on what's targeting you. But these emulations are here to, I think the big thing I want to call out is, you know, if your executive is asking about a specific threat, you can also pick one too, right? I think normally you'd have to go read 20 threat reports, you know, make a finger in the air measurement of I think will be covered, versus being able to say I just ran Darkgate, you know, we prevented 20 out of 24 steps. These are the 3 things we need to do to fix it. That's the position that we want to put you in. So that's another consideration. What's on the top of mind of the leadership in your organization? And we likely have that content too.
That's great. Thank you, Jose and Stefan. I just want to note for our Edge Solution clients, we have been bundling the threat intel. So let's say we've had several articles related to the Kimsuki group, the North Korean threat actor group, released. What we've been doing lately to kind of couple the breach and attack simulation with threat intel is we're actually making recommendations in those threat intel docs as to which tests you can then utilize to make sure that you're resilient against those specific threat actor groups, such as the Kimsuki group targeting, you know, university and higher education. We recommend 3 or 4 different packages that you can then test to make sure you're resilient against those specific TTPs. So we've been bundling that in our platform, and we hope you can check that out later in time. All right, let's move on. So we've covered, you know, the difference between adversary emulation and baseline reports. Let's take a look at, you know, what those reports contain, and then we'll actually go through an EDR baseline test and an adversary emulation test in a moment here. But so with these report findings and remediations, each of these tests at the top, you'll get kind of an executive summary with a breakdown of the prevented and unprevented tests or scenarios in each of these tests. The adversary emulation test, the item that you're seeing here, those are broken down in kind of stages, attack stages based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And the baseline tests are broken down more into categories. But what you'll be able to see here is the specific test, what was performed, the MITRE ATT&CK connection to that, any MITRE ATT&CK TTIDs so that you can know exactly where this test came from and specific remediation steps or how you can harden to that. And then this, of course, the status of the result. Then you actually get a full detailed breakdown of remediation steps. So there's overarching kind of general recommendations, and then there's recommendations in the form of actionable Sigma or Yara rules. So these are rules that are universally acceptable between different frameworks, EDRs, your border firewall, your firewalls. And so basically you can implement these Yara and Sigma rules to immediately kind of take the steps to harden your endpoint for all those unprevented steps. Do you guys, Stefan or Jose, do you guys want to chat at all about kind of how those tests are broken down in the report, or shall we just dive into the reports to take a look?
I mean, I think we should dive into the reports and we could talk about it. I think the audience would, as we're looking through a report, I think it'd be beneficial.
Awesome. Let's do that. Okay, so first we're going to start out with a baseline EDR report, that more behavior-based credential collection focused baseline. So let's take a look at that. Right. So starting at the top, you get a table of contents, you get the date the test was performed. It covers an executive summary. So what is the test all about? When did it occur? What is the goal of this test? What is it comprised of? And then you get kind of a key finding. So for this specific test, 10 out of 11 tests were successfully prevented. One of those items made it through. So if you keep scrolling down, you get kind of the breakdown of each of those tests. And the guy that made it through was collect browser data via ESEND util using PowerShell scripts. You get kind of like this nice graph showing each of the scenarios, the category, again, which was credential access in the MITRE ATT&CK framework, and then that result. Do you guys want to talk about some of the individual tests that are used on this EDR baseline to kind of open that up?
Jose, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so here we have a variety of different methodologies that an attacker would use to steal credentials. This is a core functionality and exercises a lot of the core functionalities.
Just interrupting quickly. Hey, Eric, we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, okay.
I'm seeing it on my side, just to note.
Oh, okay, now we can see it. All right, excellent.
Okay, it caught up. Okay, got it.
Perfect,
Okay.
perfect. Yep.
Okay.
It makes it easier.
Yes.
All right. But as I was saying, the idea here is to test a variety of different capabilities and functionalities of EDR, right? We have some very static things like original Mimikatz. We then try to do Mimikatz through PowerShell and different commands, while also doing living off the lands, that allows us using essential utils, a Windows, native capability to try to do some bad things. So the idea here is these are the common TTPs that any EDR solution in their baseline recommendation, in our experience and our testing, should be able to mitigate. And also, getting credentials is the first step to any attack,
Yes.
to then do additional steps. So it's super important that you have this locked down. So that's kind of the decisions that went behind selecting this.
Yeah, to Jose's point, I mean, the baseline testing, there are opportunities, certainly when we talk about adversary emulation, to reach out to your vendor to discuss, are these capabilities even there? But when we talk about baseline testing, within AttackIQ's research team, we have a majority of, EDR and endpoints set up, and we have, a communication set up with majority of endpoint vendors discussing their basic capabilities. And so baseline tests are testing functionality that should exist within majority, in this case, of EDR vendors. And so when there is a gap in the case of what we're seeing on the last item here, it's most likely something that can be configured and exist in your EDR vendor, but perhaps the feature or knob has not been turned on.
Great. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, making sure that your EDR is on in the first place is something that you might be able to discover from this test, and you'd be surprised at how often that can happen. You know, you just misconfigured a GPO, and all of a sudden your Microsoft Defender is disabled or something like that, not using the live detections that it's supposed to have. Interestingly enough, when we were testing the baseline, the EDR baseline, we noticed that Mimikatz, the original version of Mimikatz for credential collection, that was blocked by the default Defender. But then the obfuscated version that's readily available to threat actors was not blocked. So again, this is just kind of helping, you know, a very thorough baseline of, you know, detections. And it's just a great place to start out. And you're even going to be able to identify some gaps from these baseline tests too, before moving on to adversary emulation
Yeah,
tests.
and something else I'll share too, you know, I work with, you know, Fortune 1000 organizations globally, and even they struggle with this too. So I think the point I want to make here is these are blatant behaviors, right? Very blatant, very loud attempts to steal credentials. One, if it's not being blocked, but more importantly, two, if your EDR dashboard isn't lighting up and saying, hey, I just noticed this, that's also something else to look for. So again, this is a baseline. So we're also doing things here that are pretty blatant, because that means that your system should notice and should be like, hey, something's going on here, right? So that's something else that we're looking out here for, and another decision as to why we picked this content too. So just to share with that.
And I'll just
Thanks.
add to Jose here, these are blatant tests. It certainly, you know, first and foremost is helping to understand the configurations within the technology, in this case the EDR. But you know, there has been a number of breaches and incidents where the technology operated correctly, the configuration was correct. What wasn't practiced or exercised before was the team's ability to react to the needle in the haystack, or mechanism, or logging mechanism. So in many cases, you know, these types of tests are absolutely valuable to fundamentally look at the configurations of your technology, but even more so, collaboratively, can the team react to very blatant activity that is obvious that an EDR would catch, but now is the EDR alerting maybe the SIM, or is the mechanism of the team working correctly?
Is the team aware of these alerts? Are they watching those alerts? So yeah, another use case is incident response, testing whether your MSSP or your IT or security team is on it, and how quickly they respond. So, you know, just another use case for these packages.
Yeah, and team just, but what we mean by blatant is just, you know, very obvious, very loud, should absolutely be noticed by your technologist. Just want to clarify that as well. So
yeah. So after you've viewed the unprevented and prevented scenarios of each of these tests, you can scroll down, and Attack IQ actually provides the recommendations and mitigations for these. So this is the MITRE ATT&CK kind of recommendations, the overarching recommendations on how you can harden for this unprevented step in particular. So these are kind of overarching recommendations based on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. But then if you keep scrolling, you're actually going to get some Yara and Sigma rules that you can actually action on directly to lock your host down or harden your host even further. So let me find where that is. Here we go. Wait, is this it? No. These are the MITRE mitigations. Here we go, the Sigma rules. So once you get to the Sigma rules, these are actually actionable that you guys can take to harden your endpoint further. Can you guys talk about the Sigma rules that you guys have made available, the Yara rules that you guys make available from these reports?
I mean, I can talk to the way, at least start off how the recommendations are broken down. So, you know, first, and we can stay on this page first, Eric. I like the rules, but you know, the first part of recommendations is really more of a strategic nature. You know, looking architecturally, you know, of certain discussion of whether it's like GPO policies or overall approaches in configuring your EDR. And so there's a lot more explanation, a lot more text and content in the strategic section of the recommendation. It's fairly educational in nature, and there's a lot of references as far as, you know, why we're saying what we're saying, referencing back to the maybe particular EDR vendor, or MITRE attack. And then we get more tactical and more specific. So in many cases, many EDRs have the ability to add detection, engineering kind of detection rules specifically to the product. And so we have rules that we publish or we reference from a Sigma perspective, and these are standardized rules that majority of the security products will accept, whether that be in the case of all security baseline tests, not just EDR here, a Splunk, an ArcSight, a QRadar would accept, or a CrowdStrike, a Carbon Black, a Cylance, SentinelOne, name your vendor. Sigma was chosen as a standardized way that majority of vendors accept. Jose, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think big value here for the teams is, we've done the work here of matching up. This is the type of behavior that the attacker is employing. These are the type of signals that we've tested internally that we know would cover it. So it comes with that. It comes with that level of kind of analysis by us as we're providing them to you to be able to improve your environment. So I think that's the only thing I'd add here.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Next, we'll take a look at the adversary emulation report. So again, the date the assessment was taken, the specific test that was performed. In this case, it was that Kamsuki group, that North Korean threat actor group. Again, you get it broken down with the table of contents and the executive summary and key findings. So in this case, my test host did not perform as well. It failed all 3 stages, basically. But this does happen as you're rolling out controls, as you're going to these more difficult adversary emulation tools. Some pieces will have been blocked here, but not all of them. So you'll also get kind of an adversary brief, so a full description of what occurred in history around that specific threat actor TTPs, that specific adversary emulation package. You scroll down, it's covering the assessment scope. So when did that test occur? Which sections of the MITRE attack framework, as in initial access, discovery, and exfiltration, is this test focusing on? And then you get to the results section. And again, these are not broken down by category like the baseline tests, but more so stages, because these are full attack chains. You'll have the initial access for malware delivery, and then that moves into discovery or profiling the system, what systems are around us, and then exfiltration, so testing if that data can be sent out in an obfuscated manner, in a basic manner. You get each of those test scenarios kind of written out as far as what it's being performed, the MITRE attack tactics, so what reference in the MITRE attack framework that belongs to, and then the specific TTIDs, so you can dig further into each of these tests. As you can see, we were only able to block the sample being saved to the files. We were only able to block that sample being saved to the file system. The rest of these guys were not caught. And that's okay. Again, these tests are for identifying gaps. No one's being punished here. These are something to aspire to be blocking. It takes time to implement these controls. So if your leader or CEO or CTO or your chief technology officer or CISO has an issue with the results of these tests, just reiterate that this is for gap analysis. It takes time to harden these systems, but we have a way out. There are actionable recommendations that we can take from each of these tests. And it's a learning scenario, not a place for punishment. So this is just a great way to break things down and identify gaps. I just get a lot of feedback from clients that they're afraid to show some of these reports sometimes to their leaders. But again, this is just for gap analysis and identifying gaps. Do you guys want to go over anything in this space on the adversary emulation tests?
Let me just add to that. There's the phrase it's not if but when in terms of a breach, right? And so much that mentality is important, and it's core to breach and attack simulation. You're running majority of these tests, and please set the expectations of the team that there's going to be gaps. This is a very valuable exercise because you're moving forward with this kind of philosophy that we are going to find gaps, we're going to be collaborative, and we're going to determine once we find those gaps where we're going to prioritize our efforts. And so, as if you're familiar with the kill chain or MITRE attack, these are kind of progressive in the sense of initial access. How did the attacker get in? When they got in, what they do? What did they look for from a discovery? They get data and exfiltrate it out. And the discussion after you find those gaps is, well, where do we want to focus on? Certainly it might be obvious that you want to focus on the beginning, but in some cases, some teams are like, well, if they got in, we actually want to make sure that they can't get anything out. So we're going to focus our efforts on the exfiltration areas where we have gaps. So this really allows a conversation, a very valuable conversation with the security team to understand gaps and then the priorities that are important for the business. And so, I just wanted to make that point.
Thanks, Stefan. All right. And so we are getting to about 10 minutes, so we should hit the questions soon, but just kind of covering and finishing off this adversary emulation report here. You do have another recommendation section here. This one had, again, quite a few unprevented steps. So you're going to have a lot of recommendations and mitigations on how to harden this host. Similarly to the baselines, you're going to have those overarching, MITRE recommendations on where to start. And then you'll actually get to the individual Sigma rules that you can implement, same as the baseline report there. So, right. Well, either way, you're going to find those in these reports. Where is that? MITRE mitigations.
Yeah, MITRE mitigations.
Oh, here's the YARA rules. Oh, yeah, but go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah. So then that last baseline report had Sigma rules. They have multiple formats of these rules available. So this happens to be a YARA rule. And in some cases, when it's related to network stuff, you'll even get snort rules. So all different types of formats of rules available and the goal of this is for compatibility so that you don't have to, they do all the work for you. You don't have to research this in Google and try to figure out, well, how do I prevent this specific MITRE attack or how do I prevent this specific TTID? It is written out in a YARA rule right here, and these are actually linked. So, you won't be copying and pasting this. You can actually go to that link and start working through these issues right away. Did you want to add anything, Stefan?
I know we were going to go through the questions here, but there was a comment on, teams that are currently actively running, purple team exercises and training and practicing SOC and different teams. This is a perfect partner to that because in the sense, both Jose and I are versed in from a people perspective coming in and running these as teams where a BAS solution and functionality helps here is the repeatability. So you can imagine all the work it takes for those individuals to have run those exercises. How do you then, go and mitigate and add, configuration changes and then repeat that testing? Well, with a solution that comes from more of a technology kind of enablement here, you can run it in seconds. And so it really partners with any current purple teaming exercises that you have today. But those that don't have that functionality, now you don't need the individuals to run these tests. You can actually rely on the solution, and then obviously resilience as a partner and communication and discussions as far as what to do next is the powerful aspect of the combined solution.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, let's focus on the questions that we got from some of our folks on the call today. So I will look at the Q&As first. Let's see. So how do you, the first question is, how do you execute these tests without compromising your system?
Yeah, I can take that. So what we've done here at Attack IQ is we've actually studied, we do the research directly with MITRE, but specifically studied what these TTPs are doing, and we're actually recreating the attack. So we've written them ourselves, which means we have full control about what they're doing, how they clean up, how they perform, and where the bounds are. And all of our customers outside of our partnership with Resilience test in production today. So these are safe to run in production environments, and that's how we've built them. So the answer is, how can we do that without compromising the system? We've built the thing and have full control. We just built the thing to emulate threat actor behaviors with the goal of making you better, not the goal of actually compromising your environment.
Yeah, you can imagine, to Jose's point, the number of steps that an attacker takes that behavior is not common for a typical user to run on that machine, but it is indicative of malicious behavior, not destructive, but indicative of malicious behavior, not compromising the machine, stopping any business processes. And what we've is any non-destructive malicious behavior that we can rerun in production environments in a safe and controlled way, and encapsulated that into these tests. And so these tests are, as Jose said, safe to run in production. And again, we pioneered this space in 2013 and have successfully been running and working with clients since then on validating controls, optimizing controls using this methodology.
Excellent. These breach and attack simulation packages are mainly for Windows as of now, at least for the offering that we're offering through the Resilience platform. Are we looking at deploying these to Linux at all, making packages available for Linux and Mac OS?
That is coming soon, and we'll definitely maybe have one of these again when that comes. But yeah, we should see some of that in the near future.
Yeah, as you know, Mac and Linux on the roadmap, and as the audience might know, obviously there are specific types of behavior on Windows machines that are different than Mac and Linux, and so we are looking at it on the roadmap in the horizon.
Awesome, thank you guys. I'll take this next one. How does this inform our underwriting process? This is a completely separate feature from the underwriting. We're not taking any of the scores from these tests. Really, this is just for the security engineer on that call and the client to kind of review those gaps and fill those gaps. Again, your risk is our risk, so our goal is to fill any of those gaps that we identify with this proactive approach from these packages. So that's our goal there. It is not involved in the underwriting process. Do these packages satisfy any kind of requirements such as HIPAA, PCI DSS, GDPR? Do they cover any of those like cyber frameworks?
Jose, do you want to take this one in terms of?
Yeah, so we have, you know, from that perspective, these, I did asking in terms of pen testing, I would say it depends on the scope of the pen testing that you're doing and the requirements. These are not meant to fulfill, you know, those requirements that you mentioned solely, but it can be a part of that, right? Some of those requirements require certain controls to be in place. These reports can be evidence that those controls are in place and working, but it's not going to be encompassing of, you know, the entirety of one of those frameworks that was mentioned. And from a pen testing perspective, you know, it can cover some aspects of pen testing, but it depends on the scope, right? For example, at least here at Attack IQ, you know, 1 year we might focus on external pen tests, where the next we might focus on internal. So again, depending on what your goals are for the pen test as part of your overarching program, we might be a fit there, but definitely do a portion of it, not the encompassing whole thing. That makes sense.
Yes, thanks, Jose. Okay, next question. Would running these on a domain controller as domain admin offer the most value in testing defensive security technology protections?
I don't know if it's say provide the most value, but I would say running these packages under different user profiles can certainly provide some interesting outcomes. What I mean by that is, you know, when I run something as Eric, for example, he's going to have very different group policy objects than, you know, the front desk receptionist, and, you know, and then the front desk receptionist have very different group policy objects to the CEO. So running under different profiles can help you understand how the profile of the user can affect web filtering, can affect the ability for your EDR to interdict certain things because permissions are removed or added or changed because of that user profile. So to answer the question directly, it can help give you another you know, piece of context and understanding of your environment. I wouldn't say that's the end all be all of how you should test necessarily, given how the question was framed though.
Yeah. Thanks, Jose. We answered this question a bit earlier, but just to clarify, what is the correlation between Resilience and Attack IQ? We are partners. Attack IQ has come up with this technology, and they're our partner in having this feature in our platform. And anything else you guys want to add at that point? I think that pretty much summarized what we covered it earlier. Okay.
I think that summarizes it. I see another question asking about, ransomware readiness. There's plenty of ransomware tests that you'll find on there. So running those can absolutely help you ensure that you're at least noticing or mitigating what ransomware threats are doing today. So I would say it could definitely help from that perspective.
You say that these tests are not malicious, but have you had any complaints of operational disruption of any kind due to the use of these simulations?
We have not, and as Eric, you had suggested earlier, not from a business operations perspective, but in many cases, as you're running these tests, it is absolutely recommended that the teams running them are in the IT security kind of org, and that it's a collaborative, as someone had mentioned in the chat, kind of purple team effort, that this has been kind of discussed and agreed upon, so that members of the SOC understand that we're running certain tests, exercising certain controls, and that activity is occurring. And so that is a high recommendation in terms of making sure that the people of the organization are aware that these types of tests are running.
Great. What are the key differences between breach and attack simulation and traditional penetration testing? And in what scenarios should each be utilized to maximize security posture?
Yeah, I can take this one. Having previous to Attack IQ, having a pen test, and vuln management background, there's being taking a tech-enabled approach in running BAS and the functionality of BAS. What it truly allows you to do is run certain scenarios, and within seconds understanding, was that scenario prevented or not. And if you're doing it from an outside external third party kind of pen testing who's been allowed access internally, or is doing it from an external perspective, you're relying on a person. There's a lot of inconsistency there. There's a lot of randomness. Are you getting the A, the B, the C team? What techniques are they using? If you're doing any repetitive testing, again, inconsistency. But you're talking about a lot larger lag time of understanding your controls and the consistency of testing when you rely on external pen testing. Specifically with BAS, you're focused on control efficacy. And again, from a technology perspective, it's about consistent, controlled, and safe testing. I know that came up a number of times in the chat. When you rely on a BAS solution, as Hosea says, all of these types of behaviors have been extracted and studied and analyzed and used throughout hundreds of thousands of client environments to not be destructive. And so the client base should feel safe about running these types of BAS tests. And that is a huge difference.
Great. Thanks, Stefan. How often are these tests updated? The adversary emulation, the baseline tests. Specifically, though, the adversary campaigns. How often are you guys coming up with new campaigns?
Jose, do you want to say that?
Yeah, so we're continuously releasing new content in that area. What we'll do is, about every 2 weeks, we'll be releasing content based on kind of, I would call it long-term research, right? There's certain threat actors that we've been tracking and developing very complex attack graphs based on their observed patterns. But outside of that, when there's things like CISA alerts, is when we'll be responsive, right? Typically, a CISA alert can either be just a regular CISA alert or what we call them in the platform emerging threats, meaning something highly active, and we'll be very responsive to those when those occur and release content accordingly at the time.
I'll add something to that, Jose, and for the audience, I consider here, which is, I understand the nature to want to focus on emerging threats and what's in the news, and certainly you have to respond to an executive or a board member or overall leadership. How are we doing? Do we have the right defenses against X, Y, and Z threat that's just in the news? And we have emerging threats within the test packages. But that being said, majority of our clients rightfully focus on the foundations. you know, the baseline test and find gaps and failures, and then various, you know, adversary emulations that are campaigns that are tried and tested and are patterns that we'll find, you know, a number of years ago and we'll find in the future years from now. And so those patterns really help build a very resilient program. If you're continuously testing, certainly incorporate emerging threats, but it's the foundation that matters more than anything.
That's a good point, Stefan. Thank you. It's around 9:02 at this point, guys. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending, asking the questions. We're looking forward to you guys trying this new technology, and we appreciate everyone attending today. Thank you guys so much. With that, I think we can call it. Thank you, guys.